On February 8, 1914, in Chicago's Palace Theater, cartoonist Winsor McCay was putting on a show. He stood before the crowd with a whip grasped in his hand. After giving a lecture on the making of animation, McCay stood to the right of a film screen and introduced The Only Dinosaur in Captivity. The film began, and the first thing the audience saw was a long-necked dinosaur poking her head out from a cave. McCay called for the dinosaur, named Gertie, to come forward. From there, McCay commanded Gertie to do a series of tricks, from raising her foot, bowing on command, and even dancing on her two hind legs. Gertie wasn't always obedient, however, at times ignoring her master's orders and doing things such as hurling a distracting mammoth into a nearby lake. But McCay was able to placate the dino by giving her treats, an illusion that he accomplished with a cardboard apple. For the film's finale, McCay would walk off stage and reappear in the film. Gertie would then use her mouth to lift her master up, place him on her back, and walk away as McCay bowed to an applauding audience. Already a household name thanks to his Little Nemo comics, Gertie the Dinosaur considerably elevated Winsor McCay's status as an artist. And while he couldn't take his show on the road thanks to restrictions placed on him by his employer, newspaper magnate William Randolph Hearst, McCay was able to arrange for a film version of the performance to play in theaters, allowing the feat of Gertie the Dinosaur to reach a larger audience than ever imagined. While Gertie the Dinosaur was not the first animated feature film by any stretch of the imagination, its presentation and the revolutionary techniques it introduced made the film inspire an entire generation of animators. Among those inspired by McCay's creation were 6 young men: Aub Iwerks, Hugh Harman, Rudolph Ising, Carmen Maxwell, nicknamed Max, Isidore Freeling, and Walter Elias Disney. They didn't know it at the time, but all 6 of these men would later end up laying the foundation to some of the greatest animation ever put to film. But they wouldn't be doing it together. Disney and Iwerks would go on to establish Walt Disney Studios, while the other 4 would go on to establish another studio. It was very different from Disney's in many ways, but it was, and still is, the only animation studio that has ever truly rivaled Disney's in recognition and influence. But their story didn't begin with a mouse. Nor did it begin with a rabbit, nor a duck, nor even a pig, but rather it all began with a jolly happy-go-lucky fellow by the name of Bosko.
Okay, Smokey, roll 'em. And now if you'll all be quiet, we'll start the show. Chapter 1. Once upon a time. Great opening, huh? Who? Disassociated Press? The public has been demanding my life story?
In 1920, in the heart of Kansas City, Missouri, 2 young artists with grand ambitions were doing something that all young artists tend to do: struggling. Walt Disney and Aub Iwerks were 2 commercial artists who had just been laid off from the Pesman Rubin Commercial Arts Studio. After failing to start their own business, the 2 friends decided to join the Kansas City Film Ad Company, a studio that produced animated commercials for theaters using cutout animation. Disney always had creative aspirations since a young age, but struggled to figure out where he could use his artistic talents. And while he was inspired by the works of McCay, it was at the Kansas City Film Ad Company where his love for the medium truly ignited. Experimenting in his downtime, Disney tried to persuade the company to switch from cutouts to the newer cell animation technology, which he saw as having a more promising future. The company refused, which caused Disney, Iwerks, and a fellow co-worker by the name of Fred Harmon to leave and start their own studio. There they made interstitials for the local Newman Theater called Newman's Laugh-O-Grams, thus giving the 3 men a new name for their studio, titled creatively Laugh-O-Grams Studios. By 1922, Fred Harmon decided that animation just wasn't for him and left to pursue a career in newspaper comics, where he would later create the famous Red Ryder series. Not wanting to leave Disney and Iwerks in a lurch, Harmon brought in his younger brother to replace him, Hugh Harmon. Hugh Harmon was another struggling young artist in Kansas City, who also happened to be friends with other struggling young artists in Kansas City. On his first day of work, he decided to bring along some of them: Rudolph Ising, Max Maxwell, and Isidore Freeling, who Harmon had nicknamed Congressman Frisbee, or Frizz for short. The work was hard and the pay was often meager. The young animators would cut costs wherever they needed to, usually by living off canned beans for a few days or borrowing a camera from the film ad company every night and returning it early in the morning through the second floor window. When they weren't trying to meet deadlines, the six men spent their free time learning how to animate better, either by reading E.G. Lutz's American Cartoons, one of the first books on the making of cartoons, and studying the short films of Paul Terry, often using his Farmer Alfalfa shorts as reference for the types of cartoons they wanted to make.
And in that there was no sound, we could treat those things rather freely, and we would take scissors and clip out maybe 50 or 75 feet. They needed editing anyway, you know, because they just run and run and run. If they had Farmer Al swimming, he would swim forever. No stops, except to turn around and swim back the other way, or run this way, and then turn and run the other way. That kind of thing. They needed editing, so we'd prune them pretty freely and keep these strips of films as studies. And that's the way we learned to animate. We learned a lot from Terry.
But the studio struggled financially. Disney had a terrible habit of spending more on his films than the studio was making. That, combined with the limited distribution of the shorts, put Laugh-O-Gram Studios out of business within a year. Frustrated, Disney left Kansas City for Los Angeles in order to be closer to his older brother, Roy. In his luggage, he took the last short he did for Laugh-O-Grams, Alice's Wonderland, to see if he could shop it around to distributors. Luckily for him, he found one in Margaret Winkler. Winkler had played a crucial role in animation history up to that point, having been the one to produce and distribute Pat Sullivan's Felix the Cat and the Fleischer Brothers out of the Inkwell series. By the time she met Walt, she was in the process of losing the rights to both, and she needed a replacement fast. This led to Disney getting a deal to make the Alice Comedies, a series of animated cartoons where a live-action little girl named Alice, played by child actress Virginia Davis, has adventures amongst an animated landscape alongside her animated cat sidekick, Julius. Walt wasted no time in luring his friends from Kansas City to Los Angeles. Iwerks, being a longtime friend, immediately left in 1924. Harmon and Ising, on the other hand, were far more reluctant. They wanted to form their own cartoon studio where they would make animated shorts based on the Arabian Nights stories. But Disney was able to convince Harmon by saying that because he did the majority of the work on Alice's Wonderland, Harmon would become partners with Disney and share equal credit. Harmon, for some reason, believed him, and in June of 1925 left Kansas City, with Ising not too far behind him. In the meantime, Walt also made his first hire in animator Roland Hamilton, nicknamed Ham. At the newly minted Disney Brothers cartoon studio, production on the Alice shorts was tough. Not only did they have to deal with a constant rotating cast of child actresses that they had to direct, but all of them were still trying to perfect their animation skills in the process. As a result, the animation in these shorts were basic, often kept backgrounds to a minimum, and cut corners whenever it could. But the team shared a genuine camaraderie with each other and could really feel their work improving with each short. Around the time, however, changes were on the horizon, as Margaret Winkler had married another fellow producer by the name of Charles Mintz. Mintz immediately took charge of Winkler's operations, and soon found himself very unhappy with the production costs of the Alice comedies. In fact, he always made sure to let Disney and friends know at every turn. While the animation and gags in the Alice comedies were getting less clumsy and more polished with each short, Disney couldn't help but feel frustrated by Mintz's constant lectures about how his cartoons were a waste of money and destined to fail. During a shoot one evening in 1926, Disney vented to Harmon about how he wished he had $10,000 so he could quit animation, get into real estate, and buy up all the properties on Sunset Boulevard. Harmon, wanting to cheer his friend up, said, "That's alright for you, Walt, but that's not for me. I can see this cartoon thing developing to the point that we won't need to draw these silly characters, won't make silly stuff. Perhaps someday, we might, for instance, animate some of Shakespeare's plays, such as Macbeth." Years later, Harmon would recall that after he said all of that, Disney, quote, looked at him as if he had a hole in his head. In 1927, 21-year-old Friz Freleng was working for the United Film Ad Service all the way back in Kansas City when he got a letter. He had been the last holdout of Disney's old Laugh-O-Grams crew, and now Disney, prompted by Hugh Harmon, was offering him a chance to come out to Los Angeles and join their animation studio, which has since been renamed to the Walt Disney Studio. Freleng was hesitant. He liked having stable employment at the ad service and was making good money at it as well. But Disney promised that he would help Freleng improve his craft and help catch him up to the kinds of animation the rest of them were doing in LA. Freeling accepted. When Freeling got to the Walt Disney Studio, Disney and the crew were wrapping up the last of the Alice cartoons. Disney and Iwerks both deciding to end the series thanks to cost and technical limitations. To replace Alice, Disney and Iwerks had created a new character, a happy-go-lucky rabbit by the name of Oswald. At the time, Oswald was different from other cartoon stars. He was created with the intent to explore what Disney called personality animation, meaning that cartoons had their entire personalities defined by their movements and actions over than just simply their design. To really sell this type of animation, Disney's team studied the works of Buster Keaton and Charlie Chaplin and began to implement camera angles, lighting, and editing styles of live-action films into their shorts. The first Oswald short, Poor Papa, was rejected by Universal due to sloppy animation and Oswald's design being considered too old and tired looking. Disney Studios used this as a learning experience and went on to create a better, more polished short. Oswald made his official debut on September 6, 1927, with Trolley Troubles. The short showed how right Universal was in rejecting Poor Papa. While Poor Papa felt stiff and unpolished in its animation, thus making the gags not land all the way, the animation in Trolley Troubles was way more flexible and fluid. It showed off Oswald's personality a lot better and also made the gags way funnier. The Oswald cartoons were a fine example of just how far the boys from Kansas City had come in just a couple of years. The primitive stylings of the Laugh-O-Gram cartoons had now given way to amazing character-based comedy that used its medium of choice to its full potential. Hugh Harman himself had breathed a lot of the personality into the Oswald shorts by using the cinematic trades that Disney had taught him. Not only was he masterful at creating some of the most fluid animation of the shorts, but he also loved using cinematic camera tricks to play with perspective. A favorite gag of his being when a character leaps towards the camera and has their entire mouth cover the screen. It was no surprise that the Oswald shorts were such a huge hit. But Disney was not satisfied. He felt like cartoons of this period had fallen into a rut, and that distributors were only using them as filler. Disney felt like he needed to make Oswald bigger and better if cartoons wanted to be seen on equal footing as film. In the spring of 1928, Disney traveled to New York City to meet with Charles Mintz to renegotiate his contract. He was hoping to see if he could get a raise that would be put towards making better Oswald shorts. To his shock, not only did Mintz deny him the raise, but if Disney didn't take a 20% pay cut, he would not only lose the rights to Oswald, but also his entire animation crew who had just signed their contracts with Mintz. Bob Iwerks and his new apprentice Les Clark were only some of the few who didn't sign. This was surprising news to Disney, but not surprising to his crew. Between 1925 and 28, a lot had changed at Disney Studios, and that extended to the atmosphere surrounding it. The chummy camaraderie that got them through the Alice days had given way to a more hostile environment. Despite having stopped animating sometime around 1925, Disney had a very specific idea of how animation should be done, and pushed it on his staff relentlessly. His many outbursts towards the staff was also a point of contention. Max Maxwell recalled an incident where Disney tore down doodles the others had done off the walls simply because he thought they were wasting their time drawing them instead of working. Other incidents include firing Rudy Ising for falling asleep at an animation camera and getting into frequent outbursts with Isidore Freeling, whom he often bullied because he thought his work wasn't up to par with the rest of the team. Freeling had gone back to Kansas City after one argument too many. Ultimately, it was this growing bitterness towards Disney that led to the split. Hugh Harman in particular carried a special grudge because he felt like Disney reneged on his promise that got him to Los Angeles in the first place. He wanted to work with Disney, not for Disney. Defeated, Disney left New York and went back to Los Angeles to work with Iwerks on a short involving a plane and a mouse. The defecting animators continued to work with Mintz to finish up their contracted shorts under the supervision of Margaret Winkler's brother, George Winkler. But Harman, Maxwell, Ising, Hamilton, and recently rejoined Freeling soon realized that Winkler was even more of a controlling presence than Disney ever was. Ising described him as a grandmother that all of us resented very much. The sour mood got even more exasperated when Rudy Ising, once again, got fired, this time for coming in a few minutes late the day after Christmas. This environment would last for less than a year, as Universal decided that instead of farming out cartoons to an outside studio, they would establish their own animation department. Mintz's contract was terminated, and the rights to Oswald were then transferred to the new head of Universal's animation department, Walter Lantz. Though Harman and the rest of the defectors were out of the job, they saw this as a golden opportunity. Since all of them bristled at authority, Hugh Harman in particular, they could now make their own studio free from controlling bosses like Disney and Winkler. After securing a small studio space in the Otto K. Olsen building in Hollywood, the team immediately got to work on their first project. Hugh Harman had always wanted to make a sound cartoon since the technology was available. He was seeing how his old friend was currently revolutionizing cartoons by utilizing synchronized sound, and he decided he could one-up him with an idea of his own. It would involve a character that he had been sketching out since his days at Disney. His name was Bosko.
Well, here I is, and I sure feel good. Oh, you feel good, do you? Yeah, I'm just out of the pen.
On May 29th, Hugh Harman and his crew produced their first independent short, Bosko the Talking Kid. Animated by the Disney Defectors alongside other former Disney animators Norm Blackburn and Paul Smith, the short featured Rudy Ising, playing himself, drawing the titular character who immediately comes to life. He introduces himself.
Oh, wow, who are you? Who is I? I'm Bosko. That's who I ain't nobody else except Bud.
Bosko, voiced by Max Maxwell, upon being prompted to show Ising what he can do, proceeds to tap dance and sing. At one point, Ising draws Bosko a piano, which Bosko begins to play while singing.
I don't mind the gray sky. I still have you, sunny boy.
This continues until Ising gets annoyed with the character, sucks him back into his fountain pen, and pours him back into the ink bottle. The short comes to an end with Bosko popping out of the bottle and saying these words to the audience.
Well, so long, folks. See you all later.
The short, being less than 5 minutes long, was produced as a demo reel to show potential distributors what Harman and Ising's crew could do with their own character. What set this short apart from the sound cartoons Disney was putting out at the time was that while Disney shorts was focused primarily on sound effects and music, Harman and Ising's short had no musical soundtrack aside from Bosko playing the piano. The short instead emphasized the exchange of dialogue between Ising and Bosko. Maxwell delivered his lines in front of a second camera while Ising was being filmed, so that his mouth movements could serve as reference for Bosko's dialogue. And while the audio synchronization was crude, Bosko's dialogue is obviously mixed better than Ising's.
Alright, now that you're here, what can you do? What can I do? Oh, boss, what I can't do ain't.
It was still very impressive for such a small outfit of independent animators. Plus, it also marked one of the first of many times a character would break the fourth wall.
Who's all them folks out there in the yard? Why, the audience, Bosko. Can you make them laugh?
By August of that year, Harman and Ising began looking for distributors, but it was a lot more difficult than they thought. Major studios such as Paramount and Universal already had contracts with the Fleischer Brothers and Walter Lantz respectively, and even though Disney's Steamboat Willie was the shot in the arm that animated shorts needed, a lot of studios still didn't see the value in what they considered filler content. Many considered the short's music-free soundtrack to have worked against it. Harman recalled hearing in the many interviews he had with studios about how they were a little early in making dialogue the focal point. By January 1930, Harman and Ising still had no distributor, and were seriously considering going back to Mintz. Enter Leon Schlesinger. Leon Schlesinger was a Philadelphia native who had founded the Pacific Title and Art Studio in 1919. Most of the studio's business was making title cards for silent movies. By 1930, the talkies were taking over, and Leon was looking for a way to stay in business. Though he was a shrewd businessman, Schlesinger had spent most of his life in the theater, having done stints as an usher, an actor, and a theater manager. This gave him an amazing eye for talent, and he had faith in showbiz ventures that others would consider risky. He had gotten into the good graces with the big upstart movie studio Warner Brothers by helping them fund a risky project of theirs called The Jazz Singer. Warner Brothers founder Sam Warner had been trying to pioneer sound and film in a time where such a thing was considered a cheap gimmick. His ventures in retrofitting Warner theaters with the sound technology known as Vitaphone had nearly bankrupted the company, and Warner Brothers needed a big hit to not only prove that sound film was viable, but also to keep the studio from closing down. With the help of Schlesinger, the studio was able to make The Jazz Singer, netting the studio $3 million in earnings, around $44 million today, and helping usher in the era of the talkies.
Wait a minute, you ain't heard nothing yet.
Sadly, Sam Warner never got to enjoy the fruits of his labors, as he unexpectedly died of pneumonia the night before the premiere. Through a mutual friend, Leon met with the two animators and watched their short. He immediately saw potential in the two animators and signed them instantly to a 3-year contract with Warner Brothers on January 28, 1930. Warner Brothers had been trying to find a suitable animated short series that would use their Vitaphone technology to promote popular songs from their films and music publishing companies, one of them being John McCrory's short-lived Buster Bear series. Not much information can be found about this series or its studio, except for the rumor that McCrory would regularly beat his staff if they were late turning in their work. In the end, Warner Brothers thought Schlesinger's production outfit was better in the long term and bought 13 cartoon shorts from him, $5,000 for the first, $7,500 for the rest. With the deal signed, Harmon, Ising, and the crew got to work on their new series. The first thing they did was concoct a title. Taking inspiration from their old friend Disney's Silly Symphony shorts, Harmon and Ising christened their new series of shorts with the original title of Looney Tunes. On April 19, 1930, the first Looney Tunes short, Sinkin' in the Bathtub, premiered in theaters. Released alongside the lost Warner Brothers film, The Song of the Flame, the simplistic plot of the cartoon involves Bosko enjoying a bath before getting dressed up to go court his sweetheart, Honey. Throughout the cartoon, not only does he whistle the titular song, but he also plays other songs such as Tiptoe Through the Tulips, and I Am Forever Blowing Bubbles. What the short lacked in plot, it more than made up for in animation. Bosko and Honey were both very elastic characters in the physical sense, being able to squash and stretch in such incredible ways to the point their movements were almost hypnotic, a quality shared by the objects and world surrounding them, which appears to have a mind of its own. With gags involving things such as a bathtub prancing around while throwing toilet paper like flowers, and Bosko calling for his car, which comes out of a nearby outhouse. If anything, Sinkin' was a far more refined Oswald cartoon, complete with Harmon's favorite gag of a character lunging at the camera with their mouths wide open. All in all, an alright start for Harmon and Ising's new series. Leon Schlesinger hired as much help as he could get to make both his and Harmon and Ising's jobs much easier. For editing and sound effects, he hired sound engineer and composer Bernard B. Brown. Brown already had a regular job at Warner Brothers Studio recording film scores for feature films, but still gladly took the job. Schlesinger also hired Frank Marsalis, a symphony musician, to compose the music. Harmon and Ising, meanwhile, took to hiring more animators to help lighten the workload. Among them was a 21-year-old in-betweener named Robert McKimson. The first slate of Bosko cartoons were rather simple affairs, usually involving Bosko and sometimes Honey in a location doing a job, whether that job was exploring a jungle, working on a farm, or entering a horse race is irrelevant. All that matters is that things will involve an extended singing and dancing routine that's the focal point of the entire cartoon. It also didn't help that both Bosko and Honey were incredibly flat characters. It's no secret that the two of them were rough facsimiles of Mickey and Minnie Mouse, and Harmon knew it. He would often assign animators to go to the movies after work, study a scene from a Mickey Mouse short, and see if they could make Bosko do the same. His desire to beat Disney meant he was not above plagiarism. There's also the elephant in the room regarding Bosko's design. A lot of animation historians have made reference to the fact that Bosko has the unfortunate resemblance to a character in blackface, and those claims are not without merit. When Max Maxwell voiced the character, he put on a distinct Southern African American dialect. And in the copyright registration, Bosko is identified as a little Negro boy. Yeah. But a lot of the minstrelly elements of Bosko got scrubbed surprisingly quickly. The dialect was dropped after the first cartoon once Maxwell stopped voicing him, and Harmon and the rest of the crew were very cagey when asked exactly what Bosko was supposed to be. Rudy Ising in particular preferred to call Bosko an ink spot. In a letter to Black animation historian Christopher P. Lehman, animator Jack Zander addressed this. "We had a cleaning man or handyman or whatever who used to hang around the studio, and he asked me one day, 'You got Mickey Mouse and Felix the Cat, but Bosko the what?' I couldn't answer. No one admitted openly that he was a little black boy, but it was true. Perhaps the beginning of a racist conscience?" But even with all the racial baggage, one could not deny that Bosko had a certain charm about him. Harmon and crew had taken the lessons of Disney's personality animation to heart. Bosko was animated in a way that caused him to approach every single task with this unrestrained, almost infectious joy. He could make something as simple as eating a sandwich look like the greatest thing in the world. This extended to Honey, who shared Bosko's happiness. She and Bosko never just walked from one location to another, they danced. While not as immediately acclaimed as Disney or even the Fleischer Brothers, Sinking in the Bathtub was still critically lauded and showed Warner Brothers that the cartoon shorts were moneymakers. Schlesinger in particular seemed to be taken in by the cartoon's use of the Warner's licensed soundtrack, and how it promoted not just one, but 3 of the studio's songs in entertaining and memorable ways. This instantly gave him an idea for a sister series. Shortly after the anniversary of the contract signing that began Looney Tunes, Schlesinger signed another contract to produce a second series of shorts on January 13, 1931. While Looney Tunes was still doing well, it had already moved away from its musical roots to a more gag-focused series. The sister series would be a lot more focused on music and would have characters singing songs to promote Warner Brothers recordings and sheet music. Warner Brothers, having recently acquired Brunswick Records along with 4 music publishers, had tried to do this concept a year prior with a live-action series called Spoonie Melodies. But with the success of Looney Tunes, they decided to make this series of musical shorts entirely animated. The name of the series would be called Merry Melodies. After wrapping up production on the 12th short in the Looney Tunes series, The Tree's Knees, Harmon and Ising decided to split their workload after completing the first Merry Melody short. Hugh Harmon would head up direction on the Looney Tunes series, while Ising would begin work on the new Merry Melody series. Leon Schlesinger also hired more staff to their studio, one of them being an 18-year-old kid who was known in the area for selling sketches of Mickey Mouse outside the Disney studio, with Walt's permission of course. After viewing the kid's 16mm reel of animations he did, Leon hired him on the spot. The kid's name was Robert Clampett, but he preferred to be called Bob. On August 2nd, 1931, the first of the Merry Melody short premiered, titled Lady Play Your Mandolin. The last short Harmon and Ising directed together, albeit uncredited. Not only did it mark the official debut of Warner Brothers' new series, but it also debuted Ising's new original characters, Foxy and his near-identical girlfriend, unofficially named Roxy.
Lady, play your mandolin. Lady, let that tune begin. Well, sing your song of sin. I'm a sinner too.
I'm a sinner too.
I'm a sinner too.
I'm a sinner too.
But it wouldn't be until a month later when the Merry Melody series truly began in earnest with Smile Darn Ya Smile. Centered around Foxy and Roxy singing the titular song while riding a trolley, the short was a stealth remake of the Oswald cartoon Trolley Troubles. The short also featured the first instance of a gag that would later become a Warner Brothers cartoon staple of billboards and advertisements coming to life and interacting with one another. These cartoons were well received, but already a problem came up. While Bosko could get away with acting like Mickey Mouse by virtue of being technically different, Foxy was literally just Mickey Mouse with a bushier tail. And with the attention that the Warner cartoons were getting, it didn't take long for Walt Disney to notice. While he didn't threaten legal action against his former friend and employee, he did call up Ising and told him to cut it out in what is assumed to be the politest terms possible. So after One More Merry Melody short featuring the two of them, ironically named One More Time, Foxy and Roxy were given the axe. Ising attempted to find a suitable replacement for Foxy, first with a pig character, with the original name of Piggy. He only lasted 2 shorts, You Don't Know What You're Doing, and Hitting the Trail to Hallelujah Land. The next year, Ising would try with another reoccurring protagonist named Goopy Gear. A lanky dog character with long ears, Goopy Gear was like Foxy in that he only lasted 3 shorts, his titular debut, Moonlight for 2, and The Queen Was in the Parlor. Funnily enough, a month after the release of Goopy Gear, Disney would release the short Mickey's Review, which featured a character similar to Ising's. Ising and the rest of Warner Brothers didn't care, however, because it was obviously a one-off character created for a gag. I mean, when were they gonna use him again? Ultimately, it was decided that the Merry Melody series shouldn't have a reoccurring protagonist. The success of one-off shorts such as Red-Headed Baby, Pagan Moon, and Freddy the Freshman proved that they offered more flexible opportunities for stories and gags than if they were centered around a blank slate protagonist like Foxy or Piggy.
Raspberries.
Ising was the man for the job when it came for these types of shorts. Though music was still central to the Looney Tunes shorts, Harmon found not having a say in what music he could use for the shorts too confining. Ising, meanwhile, knew how to adapt any sort of music to his cartoons thanks to an almost magical sense of musical timing. Since early cartoons were timed to a musical beat, Ising worked with Marsalis to blend the music and the animation together so that they both complement each other, and it often resulted in some of the most memorable animated musical moments of that era. Meanwhile, Bosko's Looney Tunes series continued. The initial 12 shorts had been a success, and Harmon was commissioned to do more. It seemed like with every new Bosko short produced, the staff at Harmonizing Studio were slowly but surely polishing their craft. There were still rough patches, namely the voice acting by Johnny Murray and Rochelle Hudson.
Hello, Bosko. This is Honey. Oh, no, Honey.
But that, like everything else, would eventually be ironed out. Historians have said that the turning point for Bosko's cartoons came at Bosko's Holiday. It was the first Bosko short that didn't have singing and dancing be the centerpiece of the plot. Instead, it was focused on having a plot that could be used as a springboard for gags. But the pacing of that short was still relatively slow. It wasn't until Bosko the Doughboy that the jokes really began to get a lot snappier. A cartoon that uses Bosko fighting in the Great War as its setup, the short is just wall-to-wall gags that, given the situation, are just delightfully macabre. There was no official gag man at Harmonizing Studios. Instead, Harmon and Ising would preside over staff meetings in which they would sketch out a rough idea of what the new Bosko or Merry Melodies cartoon was going to be. Considering that the studio was staffed entirely by single men in their 20s and 30s who all lived a few blocks away from the main building, meetings of these sort would often go late into the night. Members of the staff would throw around ideas for jokes, while the two directors took notes and would then refine them into a script. It wouldn't be until much later that they would start sketching out ideas in sequence, with Harmon starting to pin up full-size background layouts in the studio. Around the end of 1931, the stories in the Bosko cartoons began to get slightly more complex with the addition of new characters, such as Bosko's pet dog Bruno and Wilbur, a bratty kitten that causes the normally upbeat Bosko an untold amount of grief.
I don't like vanilla.
1932 and 33 saw marked improvements in both cartoon series. In Ising's Merry Melodies, the switch to being completely a series of one-shots was paying off dividends. Because of the loose-jointed nature of the script-making process, the staff at Harmonizing Studios enjoyed seeing how many gags they could fit into a single cartoon. Not only that, but the one-shot nature of Merry Melodies allowed the animators to experiment with new ideas for settings and stories. Whether those new ideas aged well or not is a whole nother story entirely. One Merry Melody short, Three's a Crowd, became the first of an entire subgenre of cartoon short. Taking inspiration from the Billboard gags of Smile Darn Ya Smile, the short focuses on literary characters coming to life and escaping their books to engage in song and dance. Another short, Shuffle Off to Buffalo, took place entirely within the setting of a baby factory belonging to storks. This would not be the last we would see of such a concept. By 1932, the Merry Melody shorts even reached an important milestone, being one of the first Academy Award nominations for Best Animated Short Film with the short It's Got Me Again, the first Warner Brothers short to do so. As for the Bosko shorts, they too showed that they were becoming sharper in the way they delivered their gags. Shorts such as Battling Bosko and Bosko's Store provided excellent examples of physical humor, completely unbridled by the medium of animation. But the short that can be seen as the true turning point for not just Bosko, but all future Looney Tunes characters, would be Ride 'em Bosko. The short itself is a standard riff on the Western genre, with Bosko as the heroic cowboy hanging around the local saloon, but then action begins when his girl Honey ends up trapped on a runaway stagecoach. Bosko begins his heroic chase, and then...
Say, how's Bosko gonna save the girl?
I don't know.
Well, we gotta do something.
Let's go home.
Good idea.
There's little doubt that this type of abrupt, fourth wall annihilating ending would end up influencing the type of humor we would see in future Looney Tunes outings. By 1933, it was clear how much Bosko's Looney Tunes shorts had improved. All the rough edges had been smoothed out, the gags hit their mark and were better paced. There's also moments that you can feel where Harmon and the rest of the crew were taking inspiration from live-action comedies, utilizing techniques and camera angles and lighting to make the layouts look nicer, as well as making gags that didn't rely just on animation and writing, but editing.
Me wash dishes, not me, not me, la 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 la, la la la.
Even when they went back to their song and dance roots in shorts such as Bosko in Person, you could kind of tell that the Bosko and Honey of 1933 were very different from the Bosko and Honey of 1930. While they still retained some of their Mickey and Minnie-ness, you still got the feeling that they were slowly morphing into their own characters. Less folksy and way goofier characters that definitely had a far more ribald edge than Mickey or Minnie did. Everything seemed to be going well for Warner Brothers, but under the surface, things were a lot more turbulent. For one thing, Harmon and Ising were not immune to nepotism. A lot of the staff at their studio were close friends or relatives of Harmon, Ising, Maxwell, and Hamilton. This ended up creating a work culture where the animators and staff hired by Schlesinger found it difficult to let themselves be heard. Things had kind of settled into a pattern where Hugh and Rudy had their close friends. Maybe some of the animators' wives became social with Hugh's wife, and you'd say, "By God, no matter what I do here, I'm not going to get a chance to get around these guys." But nepotism would be the least of the problems for Harmon and Ising's studio. For one thing, Hugh Harmon's grudge against Disney never really went away. He always wanted to surpass Disney, but it was less about a disagreement of philosophy on animation and more about satisfying a personal rivalry. Working for Warner Brothers did put him at a significant advantage over Disney. For one thing, Warner Brothers owned a lot more theaters than the studio Disney was working with at the time, Columbia. Plus, even though Hugh didn't know it at the time, Columbia was also cheating Disney Studio out of pay that was owed to them, leading to a falling out in mid-1932. But what Harmon desired was the critical accolades Disney was getting, and all the financial security and distribution opportunities meant jack if your rival beat you out for the first Academy Award for Best Animated Short Film. Even though Bosko's cartoons had improved over the years, one could not help but feel that Hugh's desire to beat Disney at his own game held back a lot of Bosko's potential. It also didn't help that 3 years of steady work for Warner Brothers caused Hugh Harmon to develop something of an ego. He never really saw himself as a simple cartoonist, but rather a poet laureate who just happened to have cartoons be his medium of choice. This arrogance would often manifest in a disdain for the people in power who provided the money. specifically people named Leon Schlesinger. While Rudy Ising had a very cordial relationship with Leon, Hugh Harmon was quite the opposite. He had always been the most anti-authoritarian of the Disney defectors, and to him, he just saw Leon Schlesinger as just another greedy boss who only cared about money. While not entirely inaccurate, it was a point of contention that caused many disputes between Harmon and Schlesinger. By 1933, Harmon Ising Studios' contract was up for renegotiations, and the two of them wanted more money. They had been making successful cartoons for 3 years up to that point, and they wanted bigger budgets so they could keep up with Disney, who was now working with Technicolor, a new technology that made the black and white shorts start to feel obsolete. Schlesinger refused. By that point in time, the shockwaves of the Great Depression were sending Warner Brothers along with nearly every other big Hollywood studio into a financial downturn. By order of the studio, Schlesinger had to amend his contract for the 1932-33 slate of Warner cartoons, leaving him with $7,300 per cartoon instead of the initial $10,000. By March 1st, 1933, when Schlesinger re-signed his contract, that pay got reduced to $6,000. For perspective, Disney was spending around $20,000 per cartoon short at the time. The budget for the average Warner cartoon of that time had to be no less than $13,000 per cartoon. If Leon Schlesinger conceded to the demands of Harmon and Ising, he would have lost money for every cartoon made under his watch, regardless of their success. So with that, Harmon and Ising decided to walk. They would not renew their contracts, and once they were finished with their current slate of cartoons, Harmon Ising Studios would no longer work either under Schlesinger or Warner Brothers. And since Harmon owned the rights, they would be taking Warner Brothers' first cartoon star, Bosko, with them. On August 2nd, 1933, Harmon and Ising delivered their last cartoons to Leon Schlesinger and subsequently earned their last paycheck of $3,072.57. On August 26th, the last Bosko cartoon premiered. Titled Bosko's Picture Show, the short follows Bosko entertaining a crowd at a movie theater. The short is noteworthy for being the first Warner Bros. Cartoon to be banned in the newly formed Nazi Germany for a too precise portrayal of their leader, as well as a scene where Bosko says this line.
Dirty fuck!
Ising's final Merry Melody short, We're in the Money, also premiered that day. Centered around toys coming to life in a department store, it was also the last short Frank Marsalis composed for. He would leave for Walter Lance's studio at Universal shortly thereafter. Times were tough for Harmon Ising Studio for a while. While they did retain a lot of loyal staff members, at least initially, finding a new distributor right out of the gate was problematic. While they were able to keep their studio afloat by doing freelance work for Van Buren Films, and had plans to do a two-reel film version of The Nutcracker, Around 1,000 Feet was animated, they were barely scraping by. Head of the studio's ink and paint department, William Hanna, remembered how he had to endure 6 months of not getting paid for that period. It wouldn't be until 1934 where Harmon and Ising would strike a deal with MGM Pictures and make a series of Technicolor shorts to compete with their old boss Disney called Happy Harmonies. But that's a story for another day. As for Leon Schlesinger, he wasn't too worried. He knew in his heart that he was bound to lose Harmon and Ising sooner or later, and thus had a contingency plan ready. He decided he would set up his own cartoon studio, right on the Warner Brothers studio lot. And in 1933, right after he re-signed his contract, he immediately got to work on assembling a new staff and finding a new location for the studio. The new studio, Leon Schlesinger Productions, would be a small building on 1331 North Van Ness Avenue. It was a dumpy little clapboard building. It had thin walls, little ventilation, and was full of bugs, rodents, and various other vermin. It was perfect. This video was made possible by the good people at Patreon. If you want to support this mini-series, Kyoto Video, or all other future video projects, then click on the link below and join today. You'll get news feeds, early access to videos, maybe even your name in the credits. Each dollar will be going towards making this channel even better. You can also support this channel by liking this video, commenting on it, hitting the subscribe button, hitting that bell button for notifications, and sharing it with all your friends. That's all for now, folks. Thank you for watching.